Welcome to It Starts with Clarity. I'm your host, Ellen Gibson, founder of Pivot Point Me, where we help individuals and professionals gain clarity, take focused action, and confidently move into their next level. On this podcast, we talk about those pivot points in life and business, the moments when we feel called forward, even when we can't fully see the path yet. And today we're talking about something that every one of us will face if we truly want to grow. And that's movement from believing to trusting to knowing, and how we are rewarded internally and externally when we step out in faith and take the risk required to move forward. There comes a moment in every meaningful transition when belief alone is no longer enough. You believe you are meant for more. You believe the relationship needs to change. You believe the business needs to evolve. You believe you're being called into something new. But belief is often intellectual. Belief says, I think this might be possible. Trust says, I'm willing to move even though I cannot see the full outcome yet. Knowing says, this is who I am. This is what I'm called to do. And there's always risk between those stages. We often want certainty before movement, but growth doesn't work that way. Helen Keller said, life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. And William Shedd said, ship is safe in harbor, but that's not what ships are built for. Taking risk is not recklessness. It is alignment in motion. It is saying, I would rather move forward in uncertainty than stay comfortable in misalignment. And every major expansion in your life required this. Belief is the seed. It's that quiet inner nudge, the whisper that says, there's more. Belief is fragile. It can be shaken by fear. It can be talked down by logic, and it can be delayed by overthinking. But belief is where clarity begins. Then there's trusting. Trust is activated belief. Trust requires movement. Trust looks like having that hard conversation, or launching that new offer, or leaving that job, or setting the boundary, or saying yes before you feel 100% ready. Trust says, I don't need every detail, I just need the next step. As Ralph Waldo Emerson said, do the thing and you will have the power. Trust is built in motion, not in analysis. Then we move into knowing. Knowing is embodied clarity. Knowing doesn't argue. Knowing doesn't over-explain. Knowing is steady. When you move from believing to trusting to knowing, you stop asking for permission. You stop outsourcing your authority. You become anchored. And here is the paradox. The reward is not always immediate external success. The first reward is usually internal expansion, confidence, peace, alignment, self-respect. And often, not always instantly, but often, the external results follow. Now, let's talk about the cost of staying safe. There is risk in action, but there's also risk in inaction. The cost of staying in belief without trust is stagnation, and the cost of avoiding risk is quiet regret. The cost of ignoring knowing is internal friction. And friction over time becomes burnout, resentment, or drift. Now, let's talk about something else that's important. Sometimes the real risk is not the leap. Sometimes the real risk is what we are unwilling to do. For instance, in business, there are risks that business owners avoid that quietly hold them back. The risk of raising fees, the risk of niching down, the risk of releasing underperforming team members, the risk of investing in marketing, the risk of outgrowing old partnerships, and the risk of being visible. Many businesses plateau not because they lack strategy, but because they avoid discomfort. The entrepreneur believes they're capable of more, they trust it enough to talk about it, but they stop short of knowing because knowing would require decisive action, and the business stays safe and small. In our personal lives, the same pattern shows up in our dreams. We avoid the risk of vulnerability, the risk of setting boundaries. We avoid the risk of being misunderstood or changing our identity. We avoid the risk of releasing old roles and the risk of saying, "This no longer fits me." We believe we're meant for peace, joy, and alignment. We trust it enough to journal about it. But knowing would require change, and change requires courage. So we delay, and delay quietly becomes drift. So, what does risk really require? Risk requires identity expansion. It requires you to become the person who can hold the next level. You don't become confident and then take risk. You take risk, and confidence is built through action. And here's the truth. Every breakthrough you've ever experienced required risk. The first client, the first no, the first public step, the first honest conversation, the first time you chose alignment over approval. You were rewarded, not because it was easy, but because it was congruent. Now, let's do a practical reflection. If you're at a pivot point right now, I want you to ask yourself, what do I already believe is true? Where am I being asked to trust? What risk am I avoiding in business? What risk am I avoiding in my personal life? What would acting from knowing look like? And finally, what is the next aligned step? Not the 5-year leap, but just the next courageous movement. Remember, clarity doesn't demand recklessness. It demands courage. Now remember, you are not rewarded for playing small. You are rewarded for alignment, and alignment always requires movement. When you step out in faith, when you move from believing to trusting to knowing, you expand. And expansion is always the beginning of the next level. If this episode resonated with you, I invite you to continue the journey. Visit pivotpointme.com, where you'll find additional podcasts, resources, and information about one-on-one consulting and mastermind opportunities. If you're at a pivot point and need clarity around your next step, reach out to me. You don't have to navigate risk alone. Until next time, remember, it all starts with clarity.